I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and welcome to Surviving Bad, where we explore Iowa's stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. Today we look at Iowa's COVID recovery program. Iowa has faced its share of natural disasters, like flooding, the Derecho, and COVID, but the pandemic is different. It's a brave new world where technology is king, and it takes people to make it work. Let's find out how helping Iowans rebuild their lives, disaster response, and technology have come together in this time of need. We welcome Jason Haglund and Karen Hyatt. Welcome to the show. Karen, why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about what you do and why you're here today.
All right. Well, my name is Karen Hyatt, and I work for the Iowa Department of Human Services, and I'm in the Division of Mental Health and Disability Services for Community. And another role that I serve is statewide. Every state has an appointed person who's a disaster behavioral health coordinator. And I serve in that role for Iowa. And what that really means is that when a disaster is declared at a presidential level, like we've had in the past, you mentioned the flood, the derecho, certainly with the pandemic, then in my position, I write a grant that goes to FEMA. And this is what we're talking about today is COVID Recovery Iowa, which is a FEMA-funded virtual counseling program. And we'll talk more, but it's more than just a counseling program. It has all kinds of engagement activities. It has diversion. It has all kinds of things that we're trying to offer, because the premise of a disaster response, regardless of the topic, is to meet people where they're at, to find ways to engage people. And when you have a virtual grant, you have to look at every door, every option, and say, how can we encourage people to take advantage of this free service? My role really for the state and Department of Human Service is I administer the grant. I work with the providers who have been hired. We have 105 staff that are working this statewide project. And Jason Haglund, who's here, is one of our specialty coordinators. He has a long history of working in the state, both on disaster and also with youth and substance use. And so when we were hiring for certain positions, he seemed like a natural fit. And I'll let Jason introduce himself.
Well, thank you, Karen. Yeah, it's been a great opportunity. And one thing that Karen didn't mention that kind of made a great fit for this is my background in farming. I'm actually a fifth generation Iowa farmer. And this is the first time in my career I've been able to take my farming background and rich history and combine that with my behavioral health expertise. We know that rural Iowa has some different challenges, especially when it comes to disaster response and the disaster of the pandemic. We had to think differently about virtual outreach. And so it's been a great opportunity for me to kind of marry my backgrounds that were always kind of separate. I always went to the farm on the weekends and then went to my day job during the week and taught about behavioral health and stigma and substance abuse. And Karen gave me the opportunity to bring those things together. And so, for the last 6 months, working on this project and really administering to Iowans and talking about what's going on, how they're doing, how we're coping with all of the stress we've experienced from the disruptions, right? We've all felt that disruption. And so, this FEMA disaster response has looked very different than disaster responses in the past. I've stood along, the river on the Missouri and talked with people, and it looked very different this time, Peter.
Karen, this is something that's fascinating to me, and one reason I wanted to do the show, in that when we think of FEMA and we think disaster response, we think bulldozers, sandbags, temporary housing, all sorts of infrastructural stuff. And for the first time, it seems as if the pandemic has shifted it onto people. That human beings need help, that human beings need resources, and they're not the same as a sandbag or a house. They involve different kinds of assets. Can you sort of tell us how you look at a human being as something you're trying to help, as opposed to a dam that broke or a dike that broke or a house that washed away?
I think that you've really hit something that we face, which is when people think of recovery from a disaster, they do think of the brick and mortar types of services, and FEMA is, of course, known for that. They've also, though, funded crisis counseling, assistance and training program for a very long time. This is Iowa's 8th or 10th grant where we've been funded to do mental health recovery, behavioral health after a disaster event. And the people are front and center to this because the people that are providing those services, in this case, there's not an Iowan, not anyone that lives here that hasn't been touched by it. And that's very different than when we have a localized event where the center might be a tornado, such as Parkersburg, or flooding along the Missouri. It's hard to find anyone in Iowa that hasn't been touched by the pandemic.
You know, these are all great points. When we come back from a short break, we'll continue our conversation with Jason and Karen and get the rest of the story. See you after the break. You don't want to miss this. Welcome back to Surviving Bad. I'm your host, Peter Komendowski, and we're talking with Jason and Karen from COVID Recovery Iowa and the challenge of emotional wellness and resiliency. Karen, it's hard. Iowans are tough, earthy people to say, I need help, or mental health issues, and government, all these things are scary combinations. What's it like, and how do people overcome this?
Yeah, we take a look at how we're going to provide service and how to engage people. At the heart of it, this is a personal support mechanism, right? And so it's a little easier to say, hey, I need some personal support because, I've lost my job, I'm worried about my rent, I can't afford to go to get new glasses, whatever the situation is. And so there is a stigma attached to asking for assistance, and we really feel that we're trying to work around that. We always are. But this is at the heart. It's a community localized. We have staff all over the state who are also suffering from the pandemic. A lot of us are working in environments that we're not used to, and we're also learning the equipment at the same time everyone else is. So it's really a very personalized approach. We do offer the counseling that's always available. We have 3 separate hotlines that people can call. We've tried to make it very easy. We'll talk about the numbers at the end of the program. But people can go on the website and ask for personal support and tell us. They don't have to tell us much about who they are. This is a confidential. We're not going to ask, for health insurance information, social security number. We're not going to ask where you live or what your real name is. So it does allow people to come forward in a confidential way. And
so
I think,
wait, it's a safe place? Excuse me for interrupting, but in a way it's a safe place so that somebody thinking maybe it could help could go there, but they may find out they're okay. It doesn't, you're not condemning yourself by going down that path, in other words.
Right. And, counseling looks people have this idea of a couch and a box of Kleenex, and we're going to have, even virtually, it's like, no, we're not going to do that. But maybe what it is that someone comes onto one of our social media platforms and they do a meditation or yoga class that we're offering. Maybe they take a cooking class that's being offered, or they look at all the pets in our 4-legged therapy program. There are a lot of different fun things that are not traditional aspects of counseling, but they are very necessary, especially in a time of pandemic, to offer distraction and amusement. I think Jason can speak a little more to the stress and what we're seeing and how that's going.
So Jason, there's stuff for, say, pleasure-inducing and place to get you some escape, but it also deals with some hard realities where it's substance use disorder, financial crises, and other things as well, right?
Absolutely. And a big part of what we do is education, right? Part of counseling is learning about what's happening, not only with your body and your brain. And so a big part of what we do is provide education where we talk about, the stress. We're all under a lot of stress right now. Peter, I remember several years ago, I had to drive over to a studio to do this. Today, I do it from my living room. we're all doing things differently. And that disruption and that stress has been ongoing for over 12 months now. And long-term stress can have very negative impacts, on relationships, on using substances, on choices you make for coping skills. And so part of the evolution of this project it's a different kind of response, because we're having to kind of rethink how we approach our lives sometimes, how we reapproach our jobs, how we reapproach doing things in the community. Things that we used to do regularly, like going out to eat, have been disrupted a great deal. And so we all have feelings around those things. And sometimes it's hard to talk about our feelings. And that's one of the great opportunities we have as part of this crisis counseling program, is there's lots of different ways for you to learn about those feelings and to grieve. Because let's be honest, we all have to grieve certain aspects of things that we've lost. And part of moving forward and growing is grieving sometimes. And so that's part of the opportunity that we're providing Iowans, all Iowans impacted by the pandemic, is that opportunity to talk about it, have some feelings about it, share those feelings with others, and then rebuild, right? And move forward in a healthy and positive way.
These are all great points, and we're going to take a short break now. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what is normal and how stigma affects health and how to use some of these media-driven health services. See you all after the break. You don't want to miss this. Welcome back to Surviving Bad. We're talking with Jason and Karen from COVID Recovery Iowa about the human side of disaster relief, helping people heal, and a new kind of compassion facilitated with media. Karen, you were saying that there's some statistics that are downright scary that make what you're doing really, really important. Can you share some of those with us?
In the paper today, it lists Iowa in one of the highest percentages of people that are still contracting the disease, that they're still going into the hospital. We still have people dying, and our numbers, while they're not as high as they were in January, they are on the rise. And so what that tells us is we have to stay vigilant, and we have to pay attention to what we're doing and choose to do things safely, continue to wear masks and, wash our hands and do the PPE that's suggested, because it's a tough thing. We had a counselor who was telling me just 2 days ago that she had a call from a man in Iowa who lost his wife and then his son just very recently, and how grieving has halted for that individual. We know that 8 out of 10 adults are saying that they've been impacted by the pandemic in significant ways that are stressful. 2 and 3 are saying just in the last 6 months that they've experienced an increase in pandemic-related concern and stress. And those numbers are high. And we want to make sure that people maintain hope, they learn some resiliency skills, they know where to go to get resources. A lot of this is financial. And so we do have referrals and places where we can help send people in the right direction. But there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And Iowa, we have the skill and we have the talent, and we certainly have the education to do better, to take this seriously, and to not just because the vaccine is out there, let our guards down. And we do hear that the vaccine is a great thing. Don't get me wrong on that. We're all excited about potentially that bringing down our numbers and this being over, but we're not there yet. And I think Jason has some, good stress and anxiety statistics that he can include as well. Jason?
That's a question that begs an answer here. Is there was a world before the pandemic where there were mental health issues or substance use disorder issues, there were wellness issues, and people often think it goes from 0 to 60. You're either healthy or not healthy. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in between, little signals like a person being tired, having trouble sleeping, things that we don't associate with a quote unquote mental health disorder. What's like the before and after? Like, what was it like before pandemic, and what are we seeing today as a comparison?
Yeah, Peter, I look a lot of a lot of trending data. And one of the things I count on is the Health and Human Services does a weekly pulse survey. And pre-pandemic, 11% of Iowans reported symptoms of anxiety and depression. As of 2 weeks ago, it was 33%. We peaked at, I think, 46% last November. So, 3 times, almost 4 times over the course of the last year, the levels of anxiety and depression across the general population, and some subpopulations experienced even more than others. We also know at the end of last year, going into this year, alcohol sales soared in this state, and that's even with bars and some places being closed for some of that time. So we know, looking at the data, that there's a lot of ways that Iowans are choosing to cope that may not be healthy for them long term. We know that being under that anxiety and stress for a long amount of time can start to change. It can start to change your brain chemistry. It can start to change you physically. And so we're really paying attention to some of those indicators, and that's part of why this fatigue that we're all experiencing, that it's been a year, can it just be over yet? That's what makes that so challenging, because we know that some of the symptoms that we've all experienced emotionally, and the stress and the anxiety and all of those things, are going to continue for some time to come. And so, we have to be vigilant in taking care of ourselves. Right? So self-care needs to be number one right now. What are we doing to take care of ourselves emotionally? What are we doing to take care of ourselves physically? Because those two things interconnect. And so there's not been a more important time for you to look at others, where you work or you go to school with, and really check in with them and ask how they're doing.
These are great points, and leads right into where we're going to go, which is taking a short break and inviting Jason and Karen to share some final comments and some good advice that might really help you, your family, or your friends. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this. Welcome back. Today on Surviving Bad, we're talking about Iowa's COVID recovery program. Natural disasters like the COVID pandemic have changed the way we deliver help to people. It's a brave new world. Technology's our friend in this world. And let's hear in this context what advice our guests have to share. Because let's face it, Karen, you're a parent. You are just like every other Iowan, and none of us are immune to all these things. What advice would you share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think the top thing that I would share is that this is simple, right? We've tried to make this very simple, which is, if you are having trouble sleeping, if you're not feeling motivated at work, if you're changing your habits, whether you're eating too much or too little, you don't feel like exercising, your kids are just, sharing your bandwidth in your house and you can't get on when you need to for work. Everyday things. You can't even go to the grocery store, right, without thinking about, do I have my mask? How do I get gas without putting my hands at risk? So I think keeping it simple, and if you need help, which all of us have at some point or another, reach out, whether it's to COVID Recovery Iowa or whether it's your neighbor or a friend that you have. We do have numbers that people can access. We have the Iowa Concern Line, which is a 24-hour line. People can call and talk to a stress counselor. If they need legal advice, they can ask for that. That number, it's 800-447-1985. We also have a website, covidrecoveryiowa.org, and it translates into a variety of different languages. I think we have 65 right now. There's a form that people can fill out to request what time of day is convenient, how they want to be contacted. Maybe it's a text, maybe it's a call, maybe it's email, maybe it's a Zoom situation. So there's lots of different opportunities. And then there's links in the media section to our social programming. Sometimes it's just a diversion. We heard from a mom who was in a grocery store She couldn't afford the things that her kids wanted. They were starting to kind of throw a tantrum, and she was getting embarrassed and agitated. And she remembered that we had a story hour. So she whipped out her phone and she went to our YouTube channel. She pulled up one of the live readings for a book, and she handed it to her child, who sat in the car and listened to the book reading for the rest of the way to the grocery store. And she called to thank us, like, thank God you helped us, because that got me through a moment where I might have said or done something that I would regret. And just a diversionary tactic like that is part of what COVID Recovery Iowa does. And Jason can talk more about some of the things that we're doing to help people.
Well, Jason, yeah, that's the other thing, Jason. You're a parent, as both of you are. If you're going to talk to your children about some of this stuff, because they're just as affected as adults. They're living in this world with us. What are some of the approaches you would use?
Well, one of the most important things when I talk to my kids, they're high schoolers, is about mental health literacy. And it's how do we talk to each other, and how do we talk about our feelings and emotions, and how are we supportive of others? It's been very challenging for my high school age kids, just as it has been for elementary kids and middle school kids. Those kids have been disrupted. Rituals they look forward to, like homecoming, prom, they've all looked different, right? I don't even know what my son's graduation is going to look like this year. I do know he's going to go to prom this year because he didn't have that opportunity last year. So we know the toll this is taking on youth, right? We know that it's taking a great toll on them emotionally. And so I just really like to talk to my kids and sit down with them and ask how they're doing. What do they need to feel supported right now? And what can they say to their friends? Or how can they help connect their friends to resources when they know one of their friends isn't doing well or really does need support, or showing some of those signs, not sleeping, maybe saying some things like they don't want to be here that might be indicators of suicide, that they know where to go for resources and they know how to connect them to an adult. And sometimes I'm sharing with adults, where do you go to find help in your community when you hear a coworker say some of those things that may be concerning, that you know that somebody probably isn't doing well? How can you help support them and get them to where they need to be so that they can better find a way to manage through this very unmanageable situation sometimes, because none of us have ever managed through a pandemic before. I wasn't here in 1918, the last time we had a pandemic. And so, this is my first time going through a pandemic. And so I think we all just need to give each other a little bit of grace and a little more space, because we're all under more stress than we were a year ago, a year and a half ago. And so I think it's really important that we all just take a deep breath and listen to what each other has to say.
Thank you very much for both of you for joining us and letting us know that the resources out there are for all people. Maybe just thinking about COVID and stress, not necessarily people that have to look in the mirror and say there's something wrong with me, but people that may want to help their family or friends or themselves. And thank you all for joining us today. Check out our website, healthyiowa.org, for more information. And keep your eye on MediaCom MC22 for our next episode of Surviving Bad, where we explore Iowa stories of survival, hope, and inspiration. I'm MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.